Before we start, I would like to ask Mr. Yes, you from the MDHA. You wanted to talk to the committee for 5 minutes?
Yes, sir, Councilmember. Do you want me up front or back here?
Whatever you like.
Up front's better for me. It's okay with you.
Councilman Glover? Okay. Yes. Thank you for coming and share with us. I ask the people that don't have any business in the floor to please take the conversations outside so we can have him start the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for letting us appear. I have two things to discuss. One I'll be very brief on. I discussed it briefly about with Councilmember Mendez and Councilmember Withers. HUD, in a very unusual move, 2 Tuesdays ago, published a Choice Neighborhoods Implementation Grant Notice of Funding Availability. And we have been contacted at MDHA to apply for our Envision Casey project. It's a $30 million free money grant that will take this site and this proposal much farther down the field. We've done a deep dive of our staff, mainly Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I know how sensitive from the last discussions last-minute requests are, but the application is due the 29th of June, and there may be some actions required for the council. I don't know that for sure. I should know probably by Friday at the latest, one of which may be a zoning change in Envision Casey that we were in the process of doing anyway, but would not normally be complete in time for the application, and that would be what's called a threshold requirement. Doug and I are talking about it. Once I've conferred with him fully and have the staff information from him, I may be, no guarantees, coming back to you for that threshold requirement. And at a minimum, I'll ask at some point for a resolution supporting our application. So more to come. I just want to alert you to that. It's a great opportunity for our community and one that I'd ask you to support when the time comes. And I've started to talk to key members already. I think everybody sees the wisdom, and Envision Casey is perfectly suited for this program. With that, I'm going to defer to my colleague, Angie Hubbard. She has led the consolidated planning process for our community development block grants, our home grants, and others. It's an annual requirement. I'll hand out the handouts, and she's been our expert, and I've asked her to come and brief you very quickly on that process so you understand what's happening in the community. Oh, they're being handed out. Here, slide on up with me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Angie Hubbard, the Director of Community Development at MDHA. And just very quickly, I wanted to introduce, especially our new members, to the consolidated plan process. This is something that we do every year. MDHA administers 4 HUD programs on behalf of the City of Nashville. These are actually funds that are awarded to the city on a formula basis every year from HUD. And this is the Community Development Block Grant, which can be used for neighborhood improvement programs, housing rehab. You cannot use new construction with CDBG. We do a lot of public services, such as our very popular summer youth program. We also have the Home Investment Partnership Program. This is the only source of federal funds that come directly to Nashville that can be used for new construction, and which is how we've programmed them mostly this year. We also administer the Emergency Solutions Grant Program, which is to address homelessness, and then housing for opportunities for persons with AIDS. So Rosie kindly distributed a one-pager that's double-sided, and I think many of you, or all of you, have received public notices. This plan was developed through a lot of community input, and we'll be filing our legislation on Friday to appear before you in 2 weeks to really go into the plan, because it does require the vote of Metro Council to authorize the mayor to submit the plan on behalf of Nashville, so we can get our funds hopefully this summer and start administering these programs. But for your particular interest, we do have affordable housing as part of our funds, and we have coordinated with the Mayor's Office of Economic Opportunity and Empowerment and all the rest of her team to make sure that we're not duplicating but trying to fill in the gap Just to point out, all of these funds must benefit low-income persons or areas as defined by HUD, because these are HUD programs, so we follow those definitions. These are for CDBG, it's 80% or below area median income. For home rental, these are all 60% or below area median income. And so will be available next week when we present probably to Budget and Finance. I'm not sure where we're going to end up since there's not federal grants this time. But to answer any questions, you can contact me directly if you have any questions. But I just wanted to give you a heads up about what's coming in 2 weeks. And so I look forward to any questions you have. Thank you. Thank you, Councilman, for the time.
Thank you. Actually, yes, I wanted to ask you a question. How does this work within the letter you received from the committee members about a month or two ago? There was a request to get some feedback from you all.
Project-based rental assistance request?
I think Councilman Cooper is the one that sent the letter. There.
Thank you. I think Council Lady Gilmore and I signed a letter just requesting that MDHA come and have a formal presentation on the Mendez boxes, the percentage of median income and the year, and how MDHA is working towards the supply in each of those boxes.
So if perhaps we can invite you to come and have a whole meeting all to yourself?
That's really a longer discussion than we can address here, but really three large areas for affordable housing is federal funds, there's state funds, that's what you ladies and gentlemen control. That's our three areas, and we're happy to address the top two. That's really the lanes we primarily operate in, and provide advice as needed to anything you decide to do at the local level. But if there are questions on either the home funds, CDBG, or the process, we've really worked hard to get out in the public. I can't remember, I've been to 2 of the 3 public meetings. We had stakeholder group meetings. We've worked pretty hard to get out there. We think we have a good approach for this year's plan, and ask for consideration when we come back in the next couple of weeks. We're happy to answer any questions that now. On the deeper dive, we'll need to come back and schedule a separate session.
So I have a couple of questions on the queue. Let's keep it short because we have other business. This was a last-minute thing. So Councilman Coleman, he's gone, okay. Councilman Davis, I think this is from before, sorry. And then Councilman Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I was just making sure, it looks like we're getting 7 million in new funds and then 10 million total, and we're going to be spending about half on housing. And I guess you're saying you want to go deeper into what that's going to be spent on later on, but I'm understanding that correctly? Well,
certainly. Really, the largest piece for the new construction is our home budget, which is we have 1.9 million programmed for new construction. What we've done in the past is issued an RFP jointly with the Barnes. It's going to be separate this year. We have to set aside 15% for what are a special kind of nonprofit called a CHODO, which has requirements under HUD. And then we're going to do an open application window rather than a small RFP. Our nonprofits have said that works easier for them. And then with the CDBG piece, our primary funding is for homeowner rehab, and these are for, we're targeting elderly, disabled, or the very low income, but you can go up to 80%. AMI. We have a rental rehab piece that we're funding heavier in CDBG this year than in the past, because we're trying to get landlords to rehab their units, then to take Section 8 vouchers. So we're hoping to utilize this as an incentive. If they do agree to take a voucher, then we'll treat it as a grant instead of a loan. Otherwise, we'll require a loan, and that money will recycle back in to go back out for more housing. And we're also going to allow anyone that applies for these funds to also acquire property. So if they see, for example, a home in their neighborhood or the area that they target, they could apply for money to acquire and rehab the unit, then to rent to someone that's low income. So we're trying, I'm part of all these conversations around the city, so we're trying to hear where we can fit in with these funds.
How long will they have to require or take that voucher, I guess, after they take the money to rehab the home?
If it's CDBG, we're requiring a 10-year affordability period.
Okay.
For anything with home new construction, that is 20 years.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, you guys do a great program, kind of like the Rebuilding Together type thing where you keep people in their homes. So appreciate that. Yeah, and exciting to get some funds going with that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if you could please schedule a time with Rosie to come to one of our meetings, and perhaps you can talk about, answer the letter and then expand on all these. And if you don't mind sending an email to all the council members with the information, the way they can read it and they can come prepared to that meeting.
And may I add one more thing?
Yeah, sure.
If you would, on our website and at the bottom of Rosie's handout is a link. You can see a video from our first public hearing where I really explain, I mean, it's a 251-page document, but we go through a PowerPoint presentation where I explain all about these programs and actually answer some of the questions of the public. So that might be an easier way for you to help you digest all of this information. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you. Any more questions for them? No? Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate you stopping by. So the reason for this meeting was to have a conversation with the mayor's office and also to flesh out some of the legislation that we discussed at the last meeting. So let's start with Carrie and put her on the spot and ask her to give us an update on 133.
Sure. We've been working on the changes that were requested by council at our last meeting, and we have a draft. I have paper copies here that I can give to all of you. The one thing that we are still working on are changes to the set-aside table, and that would be highlighted in this version because it's not yet updated. We have looked at the income issue again, and the consultant has identified that the HUD data is the same for Nashville and the MSA. They don't take the effort to pull it out of the MSA data. And so we went back to the census table to do all new incomes based on the census table that's referenced in the definition. Once we did that, however, it caused the consultant to have to go back and rerun all of the market analysis, and so he is doing sensitivity testing on that so that we can update the set-aside table, and that will be the last edit before we can put it back before you.
So do we need to have, we probably need to do another deferral. So how much time do you need, Carrie?
I was a little bit late today to P&Z because we are trying with David to get it done as soon as we possibly can. So this week, I'm hoping to have something back before you.
Because we also want to have time to share the legislation with people so they can provide feedback. So is this a conversation the committee wants to have? For how long we want to defer that? Okay, so let's talk about that. Councilman Mendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for context, I wanted to recap where I thought we were after the last meeting. I thought there were 5 pieces of legislation that we were talking about, 133 being revised, the grants that would go along with 133, asking for a comprehensive plan, and also the 4th one was changing the authority and the requirements of the Barnes Housing Fund, and then number 5 rather, was amending the way the pilot process works. And after the last meeting, we were trying to make it so we would have all the new legislation and the amended 133 ready by this Friday, so it would all be up for first reading on May 17. And I think I'm hearing Ms. Logan say that she'll be in a position to have that done by Friday. The question I think we have to think about as a committee is we're not going to have a chance to talk about it as a committee since it wasn't ready for today for the reasons she discussed. I I think that we should hold the decision about what to do about the logistics of whether we're still aiming for filing everything on Friday until we've had a chance to talk about all of the pieces and really try to decide after we've talked about all 5 pieces whether we feel like we're far enough along to pull the trigger on filing everything on Friday, including the substituted 133. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Davis, you still want Anthony Davis? No? Okay. So then next is Council Lady Allen. I just turned you off, sorry.
There we go. Was going to say pretty much the same thing. I know that some of the other ones are perhaps in even rougher shape, and once we work through those, that may give us a better feel for how much time we actually are going to need. So I may suggest that we move on to some of those. But it looks like Ms. Logan has something to say.
I can add one thing to this conversation, which is because there's no June public hearing for the text amendment, it will have to go to July. So as long as it's introduced by the first meeting in June, it should keep on the same track for July public hearing.
Councilman Glover.
I guess what I want to say, you know, it does not hurt us to do this right. And frankly and candidly, I don't think we're even in the ballpark on it right now. When I hear both sides vehemently against what has been proposed, when we have money that's put into a budget, we have no idea how it's going to be spent, we have no idea what oversight's going to look like. There's so many components of this that frankly are so murky that there's no way to visualize what the other side looks like. I think if we kind of reel back and we wait and we get all of the components together before we file, we get away from saying we need to file it by Friday, or we get away from saying we need to file it to where it's on the July public hearing or whatever. You know, I think we file it when it's right. And, you know, the timelines, I don't necessarily feel like we need to put those upon ourselves. I think we need to do this right. It's obviously a complicated issue, and it's one that deserves much more, I guess, detailed attention than perhaps we have. And I'm not taking a swipe at anybody, but we're clearly not there. So it's my hopes that we will wait until we get this right and that we kind of have all parties involved that are kind of singing in unison on this. That's just my 2 cents worth. Thank you, Chair.
Appreciate it, Councilman. Councilman Sledge.
Thank you, Chair. I did want to give something of a brief update from the Housing Trust Fund Commission when we met last week, and I think Councilman Mendez had touched on it. As a commission, I think people were very cognizant of the added and exciting responsibilities that are coming down the pike. What the commission has decided to do is to basically double our meetings over the next couple of months, whereas we would have met once a month essentially. We are working everyone's schedules out now to meet twice in May and likely twice in June. The first May meeting is designed to be sort of educational and knowledge-based building. We have received, we've found something very productive in the commission. I would invite any committee member to attend, where we have had some of the developers and some of the nonprofits, just as we've done here, Chair, kind of go a little more in depth as to the audiences that they're working with, the builders they work with, the renters, the buyers, and they really give a sense of what their successes and challenges are. So that is what we anticipate doing in the first May meeting, and then the second May meeting, which would likely be the last week of the month, is when we would kind of start to flesh out what we're looking at from targets. As Councilman Mendez had mentioned in our previous meeting, I would expect us to have that framework to return to the council sometime in June, hopefully. So in the grander scheme of this discussion, the Housing Trust Fund Commission framework might trail a little bit, at least at first, with the other pieces of legislation we're looking at. But I think everyone at the commission acknowledged that it was a good idea to follow the path that the council, that this committee had suggested, and it's just a matter of getting that terminology right to where we can proceed.
Thank you, Councilman. I think we all really want to kind of do the synchronized thing going. So I appreciate you sharing with the committee that we kind of are in an urgency, track. So I guess I'm clear enough. So does anybody else wants to make a comment? Councilman Mendez.
I guess this is a question, just a comment about the timing of 133 or about the other couple pieces of legislation?
In everything. I mean, I guess we have, because tomorrow is the day that the 133 is coming back, we need to decide, and I actually have a question for council, for our attorney, if we can do an indefinite deferral again, or we have to defer it for a specific amount of meetings, if we wanted to synchronize with the other legislation.
Well,
yes? Okay, so the question, he's telling me that we can do an indefinite deferral. Obviously, I'm uneasy. I want to really move forward, but at the same time, I understand that doing something comprehensive is what everybody wants, including the members of the committee. So I think it's important to be as comprehensive and coordinated as possible. So, did I answer your question?
It did answer my question. So, all right, several things. This is going to take a while, so bear with me.
Okay.
First of all, the other piece of legislation, Council Member Allen and I took a shot at drafting a resolution for a comprehensive plan that I've got copies of, and I don't know if I could ask Mr. Woodson to pass them out, maybe. Thank you. And this is an attempt to do what A Voice came in here and asked us a few weeks, or maybe a month or so ago, to do, a resolution asking the mayor's office to put together a comprehensive affordability plan. As closely as was possible, mirrored the exact language that A Voice asked for. And it's for discussion, but it would ask for a comprehensive plan that put target goals on it and metrics that would be measurable over time. Also, since we met last, we talked about amending the pilot program to allow for more money to be set toward it, and also to require tighter coordination between MDHA and planning. And I've got a draft of that I put together, and both the mayor's office and planning have seen it. I've talked to Mr. Harbison at MDHA about it conceptually, and subject to everybody still wanting to think about it more. So far, everybody who's seen it is in agreement with the concept, and maybe Mr. Woodson would be kind enough to pass this around also when he gets a chance. And so that's two of the pieces of legislation. The 133 is the next one. The grants legislation also needs to be passed around. That's in a very rough draft format, and there's a couple things that, so this is the first time anybody's attempted to draft the grants legislation that would necessarily go along with the inclusionary zoning. And we've had to leave blanks for the department that would administer it, and we left a blank for the amount of dollars that would be committed to it. One of the things we need to do is ask the mayor's office to get for us what the dollar amount would be. And I'd like to ask Ms. Harris if she could check on that for us. And that's just, we've talked about that for the grants legislation. We would need a commitment from the mayor's office about the dollar amount to be committed to that. For me, I think that the delay and making it perfect, I think we're falling into a situation where perfect is enemy of the good. I think with, like we talked about at the last meeting, with these 5 pieces of legislation, we would have 2 that related to inclusionary zoning, 1 that provided for the comprehensive plan that a voice asked us for, and 2 others that specifically went to making the infrastructure and dollars for affordable housing more robust. And I would be in favor of saying that we should move forward with trying to get these filed rather than putting them off indefinitely and rather than waiting any longer.
Thank you, Councilman. It's always good to file them because then they become part of the public record and people can provide feedback to us. So we can file, and then if it's needed, we can defer them like we did with 133.
Okay, sure.
I have Council Lady Allen. Do you want Adrian to answer your question?
Adrian and I have talked before. She knows what I'm asking for.
Okay. Adrian, you want to address the
Yes, I've been talking to Councilman Mendez, and we'll have some idea of what a cap would be. So, yeah, we've talked about that.
Thank you. Council Lady Allen, you are on the queue. Let me turn this off. On. Yes.
Just to address the grants again, it seems to me that that also is going to be having income coming in perhaps from in lieu payments, and that we will need the consultant maybe to do some projections on if there's a place to where we could make that even self-financing if we pegged it right. Yes, I'm asking for your thoughts on that.
I think that that's the long-term goal. In the short term, though, there won't really be any money coming into the fund. Mm-hmm. And so I think the plan is to have some markers, some reporting markers, and some markers for the grant program to have to come back before you if they're running out of money. I believe that was the initial plan.
And this is totally separate from the $10 million that's been designated for the Barnes Affordable Housing Fund. Would this be run through the Barnes Fund or with kind of a dividing line so that they don't get mixed up, or how would that work?
Right. So just like the Barnes Commission is staffed under the mayor's office, the idea that the Grants Authority or anything like that would also be staffed through that whole affordable housing kind of lens. Yes.
And then for the long run, I think a very good point was raised that this current mayor is very committed, and so we're good for 8 years. But in the long run, you know, the possibility of moving this to social services or some other department so that we know we're guaranteed for the long run, and that's not something we have to figure out today, but just something to be.
Right. I think a part of what we're doing is trying to see what departments may also be helping in the whole affordable housing piece, mm-hmm. And also trying to just figure out a strategy metro-wide. So that's kind of what we're looking at to see who else would be a part of that.
So we'd structure it with some flexibility, so once we sort of learned how it worked, we could move in that.
Correct.
In that ultimate direction. Okay, I would agree with Councilmember Mendez that the pieces are slowly coagulating and partly because we continue to have things on the table. I'm not sure I totally understand. Because there is no June public hearing, if we defer one meeting, what does that do? If we defer 2 meetings, what does that do? Are we automatically pushed till July? If Ms. Logan can explain what the options are, that'd be helpful.
Even if it's introduced tomorrow at the May meeting, because there is no June public hearing, it will be on the July public hearing. So you have tomorrow's meeting, the second meeting in May, and then the first meeting in June are all options for it to be introduced and stay on the July public hearing, which is the meeting that it's tracking for now.
Thank you. So you all got copies of the different drafts. I will encourage you to review them and send an email to our lawyer, Mike Jemison, with any comments or reviews that you would like to do to them. Obviously, we cannot talk to each other about legislation after the meeting. So please take this opportunity and help us craft a better legislation. Council Lady Gilmore.
Thank you, Chair Bettany. I appreciate you and your leadership and your follow-through. I think sometimes people don't appreciate how much perseverance it takes, right? with always to walking the legislation through last year, to over the summer campaign, and to coming back and meeting people and still following through. So I appreciate you being the chair and taking that up. I wanted to commend Council Member Allen and Mendez as well for taking the opportunity to draft and tweak various pieces of legislation. I did have the opportunity to briefly look over them. So the first one I was sharing with Council Member Mendez, the resolution for a comprehensive plan for the issue of housing affordability. That's pretty straightforward. But I did want him to walk us through briefly, if he could, the second one, which is the grants ordinance for the production of affordable and workforce housing units. There were a couple of places that had intentional blank marks, and I wasn't quite sure what went there, and I wanted him, if he could, take this opportunity to walk us through it while we're on. You know, it's a called meeting and it's noticed, so we could do this right now, if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
Thank you.
Thanks. That's a good question. So from the beginning, last fall, when the first inclusionary zoning presentations were coming out of planning, they were clear that there were really two legislative pieces that needed to happen with inclusionary zoning. One was the zoning code requirements about how many units you would have to put in and what the in lieu of payments would be, and they drafted that. They were clear from the beginning that there was a non-zoning code part that was needed for inclusionary zoning, and that was what people refer to as the grants part of it. And the grants part would be a source of money where Metro would provide an incentive under certain circumstances to encourage the production of affordable units. The grants legislation has never been drafted, and the blanks in here really cover two things that are question marks as of today. Question mark number one is, who will administer the grants program? Will it be Metro Finance? They say no. Will it be planning? They say no. Will it be Eric Cole's office, which exists only by executive order? There's no statute or charter provision that creates that office. That's an unknown right now about who would administer those dollars in the grants. And then item number two that's unknown is, so how much? How many dollars is it going to be? And you know, obviously part of the hustle to try to get it drafted, at least right now, is because we got the budget process going on, and that's the open question for Ms. Harris is what's the mayor's office position on the dollar amount that would be committed to it, and then the question for everybody in the process, which isn't to the finish line at all, is who would administer it. And right now, as of today, there aren't good answers for that. Given the fact that we had this meeting coming up, Mr. Jameson and I decided to get this out here with the blanks in it, just to prompt just this conversation, the fact that there's these open questions about who would administer and what would the dollar amount be.
Mr. Dunn.
Thank you for providing the opportunity, and thank you, Councilmember Mendez, for filling that in. So this speaks to, I think Councilmember Allen just asked this question, and I really wasn't, now it's a little bit more solidified in my mind as to what's going on with this legislation. So is it some legislation that we would need to create an office? So after Mayor Berry serves her 8 years as the wonderful mayor that she is, that we still have this, or what is the position? Are we to wait until the 7th year to try to create a statute so that we're clear about who administers this money? It seems like that's a big piece to this.
I mean, we're also thinking about this with the Barnes Commission, just trying to make sure that there's a long-term strategy. So that's one of the things that we're discussing now, is what's that administrative function, knowing that it's currently coming out of the mayor's office, what's that long-term function? And that's something we're working on now. And I think we'll be able to present something soon. It's just the same questions that you're also trying to answer, we're also trying to answer as well. And I think we'll be able to have some solid answers in the next couple of weeks, just not tonight. So.
That's fine. We'll work together. We'll work together on it. That's fine. Okay, so I just want to compliment Councilmember Mendez and Allen and Bethany, once again, for all of your hard work. It's greatly appreciated. You've put letter to pen, persevered, and we're going to get it done.
It's a team effort. I don't really think it's up to me. We all did it. So thank you all for. I mean, we have people that come to these meetings that are not even on the committee, and they come to every meeting. So I'm very thankful to everybody's working here. And having said that, I have Councilman Sledge on the queue.
Okay, so what are we doing with tomorrow's legislation?
Thank you, Chair. To the point of Councilman Mendez's second question about kind of what is the funding that we place in, I'd like to get some sense of the conversation that's taking place. I'm assuming there's a conversation taking place between the Office of Economic Empowerment and the Planning Department based on what has come before you as these conversations have been occurring, because I think we could guess at a number and take a very educated guess, but I think there's also, given projects that, given solely on the people that I've sent Carrie's way, and since we started this conversation, has there been sort of an idea of what that amount might look at just based on the conversations that we as council members are having with developers and those who might potentially fall under this this bill?
We had some preliminary conversations with the consultant throughout the process about how much we should identify for this purpose. And his response pretty consistently has been that that's really more of a financial question of how much the city wants to choose to put towards it. And I think some of the things that we've been talking about as far as reporting mechanisms and automatic triggers for it to come back through the council, especially as we enter the first couple of years where we won't really know how much to put into that fund. A lot of it is also very dependent on the market. And so if this were to pass and the market changed drastically for some reason, we could have either too much money or not enough money.
There is never too much money.
And that's fair. That's a fair point. I think in the time amount that we're looking at right now, I mean, I think we have at least a basis to go on. I mean, just in District 17 alone, I think I'm now up to potentially 200 units that could fall within this. And so I want to make sure that as I have those conversations, I'm sure every council member wants to know if as they have these conversations, that they're not, that we're working on a basis of fact and we're working on a basis of opportunity, so that we are not sort of requiring or working on legislation that assumes this grant incentive program when it could be. My concern is it being underfunded, quite frankly. So I do want to make sure that we have both the willingness from the administration to place in a line item for this to start the funding and to make sure that that funding is adequate. Not really a question. I just wanted to say that.
All right. Well, I don't have anybody else on the queue. So Adrian or Carrie, you guys have any comments? Any last words? For today, I mean. I want to take yes, Council Lady Allen.
Again, just to throw out, we had a very productive meeting about a month ago, I've lost track now, where we had a number of stakeholders come and join us and look at specific legislation. That got rescheduled from April 25th because these pieces weren't ready, and they're getting closer to being ready for that type of discussion. Right now, tentatively, I think we have a spot saved on May 16th to continue that discussion. So, I mean, I think that gives us a goal to shoot for whipping these things into shape to be ready for that type of discussion. Do we feel like we're on track for that would be my next question. And do things need to be filed at that point or not filed?
I think it will be appropriate to have that meeting. I mean, there is never too much feedback anyway. Mm-hmm. So the more we engage with the community, the better. Councilman Mendez?
For filing things, with when our legislation filing deadline is, the only days that matter in May are Friday the 6th, because that's the filing deadline for May 17, and Friday, May 20th, which is the filing deadline for the first meeting in June. So I would, the problem is every time we have a public meeting to talk about it, if there's any amount of thinking to do afterwards, then we need another public meeting in order for us to talk more. So if we had, I think we can talk about non-filed drafts. If we had non-filed drafts to talk about at the public community meeting on Monday, May 16, I think that's fine. The logistical hurdle for us is if we want to get stuff filed then by May 20th, 4 days later, we don't really have a mechanism to talk about it because, well, we just don't, short of setting another meeting again. And also, did we get clarity on, or is 133 going to get deferred one meeting or two, or did we get clarity on that?
Well, the way I heard Carrie, that we can defer 3 meetings and still be on the same place as if we defer 1 meeting. She's doing the victory sign. Oh, no, no, I'm kidding. So we can defer 1 or 2 meetings and it will have the same impact. So I think to be on the safe side, we should defer 2 meetings. But I still would like to, as soon as we have that legislation, I'd like to make that available to the community so they can start looking at it and giving us feedback. So I don't know how we'll do that. Mike, Mr. Jameson, can I get you on the microphone? Sorry to interrupt your conversation.
Sorry about that.
So we file a legislation, that's what's on the record. We defer it, so we never voted on it. Can we replace it with a new legislation
You mean a substitute?
and have it on the record, replaced without going through the council, or we need to bring it in and vote on it? How does that work?
No, if you filed, I mean, if it's a substantially altered piece of legislation, then you'd be filing a substitute. The deadline for that would be the Monday before the regularly scheduled council meeting. So if you were to file, for example, if you proceed on, let's just say May 20th as your filing deadline, although that may be optimistic, you would not actually have to have your substitutes filed until June 6th, in which case you'd move that on June 7th as the substitute.
But if I wanted the legislation to be on the record and then defer it to later, I can do that, right?
You can file it in advance of that you just want it available for public comment.
Yeah, I want to make sure people know what we're talking about as soon as possible.
What I might suggest is that it be just separately perhaps posted on the council website, since your real purpose is getting it out for public review, and then filing it with the typical rules deadline, depending on whether or not you decide to do that in May or June.
Is the committee okay with that?
I think we could also have a link on the planning website as well, because there's a place on the planning section where people are looking for what's going on with affordable housing. So as long as, and Carrie has something to say to that.
We can certainly do that. If there's an issue with getting the information out there so that people have the chance to see it, you could, if you wanted to substitute it earlier, substitute it at the second meeting in May and still have the public hearing in July. People would just have more notice to read what's been updated on the clerk's website after it passes first reading.
And that would be appropriate if we felt like we were close and didn't have a lot of changes, so that we're not making major amendments to the substitute. At what point would we need to make that decision?
Tomorrow. When you decide whether to defer it 1 meeting or 2.
Gotcha.
We do have the edits that I have here, I can pass out. It's really the issue with the set-aside table and having to rerun all of those numbers, but we anticipate having that in the next few days.
Thank you all. So if we don't have any more comments, you and me being the sponsor, we just have to decide what we're going to do tomorrow. If you guys trust us to make that decision, we can just do it tomorrow. And then if you don't like it, you can vote against it during the meeting. I guess that's it. Do I have any more comments or questions? No? I just wanted to do a shout out to my friend Matt Kenningson. He's sitting in the audience. I'm not going to let you speak, but he's interested. He's very involved with the makers community, maker community, and they are a great effort to empower people to make stuff, from robotics to anything. So, and they are struggling with affordability. So please take the time to meet Matt and learn about it. Thank you all. The meeting is adjourned.